All right, everybody, welcome to our presentation on what exactly is money. We're going to go over the history of it, the information surrounding it, how it works, how these pieces of paper in your wallet can buy you things like food and computers and just cool stuff. And let's just dive right in and see exactly what is money. So, what exactly is it? In the simplest form, it's a medium of exchange. It basically means it's a thing that we use to exchange for a good or a service. Easiest way to describe it, I want a thing, a store or another person or someone selling something has the thing that I want. So if I give the store money, the store gives me the thing. And money played a vital role in how we created that that exchange. So, let's keep pushing forward and seeing what exactly this stuff is and the origins of it and how it works. So before we dive in though, let's look at some questions that we're getting. How do we know how much money we exchange for a product? I mean, yeah, sure, the store puts a number up next to it and we have to give the equivalent amount of that, but what exactly made it so that, this item, this object was worth $14.38? Why did it come to exactly that price? Right, another idea, why are those pieces of paper worth something, but my crayon art isn't? You look at that $20 bill on the right, why can't I exchange that, although the dollar bill on the left looks, like a legit piece of exchange? If somebody or an alien or like a different species or some kind of being were to look at this information and say why are you exchanging pieces of paper with numbers on it for things? And how does that work? When do we even decide that money is universally exchangeable? When did we decide that everyone will accept money? How did that come to be in today's society? And also, who gets to create and make these rules about the money? Why can't I just fire up my printer and make more of the money? Well, obviously it's illegal because it would be counterfeiting, but why is it counterfeiting when I make it, but it's not counterfeiting when a government makes it? And we're going to dive into some of those philosophical questions on here. So the history of money goes way, 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 way back. Money was not pieces of paper that were being passed around. You know, there's a lot of different ideas and breakthroughs and information and stuff like that that we should be focusing on. The barter system was one of the first ideas of money, where people would trade items back in 9000 BC. We moved to precious collectibles such as seashells. We had precious metals as coins. Paper notes were being created at one point. We had gold backed currency, which basically the currency guaranteed you to get the gold back from the government as an exchange. And now we're in an era where we have digital payment systems. You take a credit card or even PayPal or the Cash app or anything like that. We can move money around. And we're even at a point of where there's a good argument for digital currencies like cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, Stellar, all these different things. What are these things that exist that people are accepting as cash left and right? So going to a history from bartering. Bartering, which is a fancy word for trading, was one of the first ways we exchanged things. Two people could trade a good or service in exchange for something else. On the good side of it, this was the first examples of being able to trade items. You didn't have to create all of your means for survival. Before bartering was like a thing, if you wanted to survive, you had to make your own clothing, you had to hunt your own food, you had to do your own preparation, you had to create your own tools. There was a lot that you had to do, and you couldn't specialize in one thing to be really good at it. And you no longer needed to make all of the things. You could trade all of your stuff or some of your things for other items. If I'm really good at making tools or hunting weapons or things like that, I could trade that for some food, and then people would have the means to, hunt their own food without having to worry about making their own tools. And this led to something called skill specialization, where you have the ability to do a much better job at one or two things as opposed to being or forced to be able to do every single thing. Instead of spreading your skills out over many different areas, you could get really, really good at one or two items. On the bad side of things, right, we have, if I have cheese and I want shoes, I have to find somebody who's going to take up that trade. I can't just say, like, you have to give me shoes for this cheese. They could say, no, thank you, I'll look for something else. Or if there's something like I need to trade some of my cow, like I've raised a cow, to get a haircut, I can't really break down the cow into pieces without killing it. So, I can't really trade one cow for a haircut unless I decide to, kill the animal and use it for its pieces for food or other types of uses. And I also have to remember what every single thing is worth in terms of another. How many carrots is my baseball bat worth? How many carrots is an ice cream cone worth? How many carrots is an automobile worth? And we run into this very weird situation where, like, we are very, very, just caught up in all of this accounting and keeping track of things. So, luckily, what happened down the road is people started looking towards precious collectibles, and that's the next item on this timeline. Rare items like seashells or cool looking rocks would end up being used in exchanges. And what made this really nice is it was much easier to transport, and you can establish prices on seashells. If they're tiny seashells or little tiny rocks that look cool, this is definitely something that we can use to like account for items. I could say, well, yeah, I want an ice cream cone and I'm willing to trade an entire cow for it. Instead of having to facilitate that trade, I could say, listen, I want the ice cream cone and it's going to cost me 4 seashells. If you want the cow, you're going to have to give me 700 seashells. So we can use these precious items to exchange for value. Now, there are some issues with this. Let's say all of a sudden I discover a beach that has millions of these seashells lying around. They've stopped becoming rare. And as a result, there's going to be a lower demand for it, right? Think of all the things that are super rare in this world, collectible items. If a company all of a sudden released 100 times as many of those items and pushed them out to the market, your collectible items aren't going to have as much value anymore. And also with the idea of shells, they can be broken, they can be worth less. Some items can be fragile, they can be lost, damaged, destroyed, things like that. So we just want to make sure that, when we're at this point in history of precious collectibles, we're in a position where we can actually trade and exchange those items. But as we've noticed through our daily day-to-day lives, society has evolved and grown with better forms of money. So now we're looking at the time when we had precious metals as coins, a silver coin, a gold coin. These different items could be exchanged and they could be, passed through, and they were a little bit more sturdy than seashells. So the good aspects, it was really easy to transport. They were less easily damaged. They're made of metal. Yeah, gold and silver are relatively softer metals, but it's a lot better than seashells. If you fall on gold coins, they might bend a little, but if you fall on seashells, they're all going to crunch. And they can even be broken down into small enough pieces for most uses. I can break a coin into 2 pieces. I might need some tools to do it, but I can trade a half of a coin or a quarter piece of coin or something like that, and that can easily just facilitate the exchanges. There are some bad things. These things can be faked. In today's society, we're having a bit of a crisis in the gold industry where gold bars are being filled with a similar density metal, which is called tungsten. So you kind of like make this bar of gold, but first you make a small bar of tungsten, and then you plate the tungsten with gold, so it looks like and feels like the entire bar is made of gold. Tungsten is not a very valuable metal. And also the idea is that people would shave the edges off of coins and remelt them. And if you're coming across 700 or 800 coins in a month, you could shave off just a tiny bit around the circle every time. Collect all those shavings, those little tiny pieces, and then you could make your own coin. There's a whole situation of where coins were being shaved down. This is in ancient Roman times or Greek times, I believe, where the start of a coin would be about this big, and then by the end of it, it would be that large. It would be super tiny. So these coins are kept getting shaved and shaved. And if you look in your pocket right now, there's a lot of coins that have these extra like ridges on them. They're like edges. And the reason why that's there is it's because it's an old artifact. It's an old piece of history from the tradition of making coins like that. And the reason why is if you built those ridges around it, you couldn't shave it off unless you wanted to recreate all of those ridges on the coins. So it was kind of like a prevention system to stop people from shaving down the coins and trying to collect the little bits and pieces to make full coins. After a while, we started moving into paper notes. And this is really interesting because we can kind of see how gold and silver have value. But what about paper? Anybody can make a copy of this paper, right? So let's kind of talk about how that happened with the origins of it. Instead of carrying around gold, which got pretty heavy, people found that there were these businesses or houses or locations. You could leave your gold there to keep it safe. They would guard it and they would hold on to it for you, and they would give you a receipt, like kind of like an issuance of you have this much gold stored with us, and you could pick it up whenever you wanted. So people got pretty clever with that. If I have a receipt that says, this is worth, 9 gold bars, I can just go up to somebody and say hey, I've got a receipt that can be exchanged for gold. Here, I'll give you the receipt so you can go collect it, and then I'll do the trade with, you take the receipt, I'll take the item, the carrots, the baseball bat, the cow, the car, whatever it is, and you can go bring this and get an exchange on it. And that worked out pretty well for a while. It got pretty clever. On the good side, it's a lot easier to carry around a piece of paper as opposed to a giant piece of gold. And receipts could be made into smaller and smaller items. Instead of me saying one receipt for 9 pieces of gold, I could get 9 receipts, each one worth 1 piece of gold. Or I could get 900 receipts, each worth 1/100th of a piece of gold. And that was allowing me to break down the items even smaller than I could with the coins reliably. On the bad side, people can make copies of this. And you notice that the image at the top, I believe that is ancient Chinese currency, and you could see the stamping system on the upper far right, where you could create it. But if you could find that stamp, you could very easily make copies of that, go in and claim half the gold in the bank and the organization, and then they would be stuck with all those extra pieces of paper. There's also the idea that there's no real promise that the exchange has enough gold for all the receipts issued. What if, this building or this business sold a bunch of the gold and is just relying on trust that people aren't going to be collecting their gold or silver? And the other idea is paper money could be very easily destroyed or lost in a fire. That's another situation where paper is a little bit more sensitive to things. And if you've ever thrown a few dollars through the washing machine, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So anyway, let's keep pushing forward in history though. So after a while, governments started picking up on this idea. And the US government is an example. That's a really old looking $20 bill. That's actually a receipt for gold bullion, I believe it's called. $20 in gold coins payable to the bearer on demand. This was basically a promise from the government that you could bring that $20 bill to the government and say, I would like the gold value of this, please, right now. And they would give it to you. So the government's kind of adopted this. They're like, oh, this is great. Any citizen could turn in the currency for gold and we can hold on to it and we can issue the money. Awesome. Some of the good sides, governments were seen as a little bit more trustworthy than anybody else on receipts. These type of paper notes were much harder to make fakes with. If you've seen modern day currency, my goodness, is it great at looking authentic. You have $100 bills now that have a gold strip on it and things like that. These type of paper notes were much harder to make fakes of, like I said. The paper notes were recognized across the entire country. If the whole federal government is doing this, then you're good, in terms of exchanging it, hopefully. On the bad side, though, the government did have to deal with storing and promising the return of gold to anybody who wanted it on demand. Those things can cost money, so it's something that it costs a lot of money to keep up and running. And on the other idea was this is what actually some people argue caused a major currency crisis several times throughout history, where people were less likely to spend their money since it had gold attached to it. The idea is, wow, this gold is so precious and valuable. It keeps being worth more and more money. Why would I spend my money if it'll be worth more in 3 months? And that's kind of a valid, idea. So people were much less likely to spend their money since it had the gold attached to it. Less moving money is generally seen bad, like as a bad things in terms of economic activity. And when people aren't spending money, it means that, commerce and exchanges of products and goods and services and skills aren't being moved. And that can spell disaster for an entire nation. So, the idea is it kind of encouraged people to spend less money, and that's a little difficult for a government to hold on to. Um, and also something worth noting, the U.S. did step away from gold-backed currency in 1977, where the idea they actually disbanded it because they said the U.S. dollar speaks for itself. And it was very controversial. It still is, and it's a very interesting situation. So, but moving forward, now we're getting to the point of where we can just do digital payment systems. My paycheck gets digitally deposited into my checking account, and then I use credit cards or debit cards or things like that to make the majority of my purchases. So really, like, I don't even see my money moving from where I work over to my checking account and then to be paid to the company or the organization that I'm paying for goods and services. We have credit cards, debit cards, PayPal, the Cash App. It's some pretty wild stuff. And on the good side, it's much easier to make payments for purchases. Swipe a card, scan your phone, just make the purchase happen, boom, it's done. Payment systems operate smoothly and quickly. There's a much smaller chance for even counterfeiting, right? Because you would have to fake an app and connect to all these services, and it would just be a nightmare in terms of authentication. And also, we can have payments be processed by a computer instead of a person. I remember in the 90s, if you wanted to buy something, you had to interact with a person. You would bring it up, they would scan it, they would, cash you out, and that's what you would pay. But now, I mean, I can do one-click purchase with websites like Amazon or eBay. Boom, click, purchased, bought. On the bad side, there are risks of being hacked or having technical difficulties or issues. And on the other side, there's also companies have to follow the laws involving how they handle money. Thankfully, things like credit cards have opened up the payment processing system, but that's just another company that gets in the middle of you and your transaction, which in general is said to add more to the expenses because they need a profit incentive for doing it too. But in general, I think digital payment systems have gotten better and better over time. Now we're kind of diving into a more modern thing, something that I'm extremely passionate about, which is digital currencies, or as some people call cryptocurrency, which uses the fundamentals of cryptography to create digitally secure and trustworthy monetary tokens. I don't think you can really call them money yet. Some people will, some people won't. If I'm teaching a course on cryptocurrency or educating, I'm going to call it money. But in this course, we need to take that very open-minded but cautious approach to these types of things. So if you've heard of Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of those other types of coins, they're pretty interesting. They just only exist as code on the internet, which is like really weird if you think about it. On the good side, there is no ability for a government to keep printing money for their needs or desires or wants. And again, that's controversial, of course. But the main idea of it is, you hear about these countries that have hyperinflation, which is something we'll learn about later. But they print so much money that everyone's savings become essentially worthless. Does it happen everywhere? No, of course not. But the fact that it could happen is a little bit of a scary thought. The other idea is the rules for this system are created digitally and are very strict. That's pretty neat as well because you can create your own cryptocurrency today if you want. Will it be successful and big? Probably not, unless you have something unique and technically superior about it. But it is kind of neat that you can create the rules on it. And as a result, a lot of these currencies are scarce, meaning there's limits of how many can exist. And that's a pretty interesting approach as well, because like on the Bitcoin side, there will only be 21 million Bitcoin. That's it. There's over 350 million Americans right now. So there's not even one Bitcoin for every American. There's not even one Bitcoin for every 10 Americans. And as this becomes a more scarce item, demand could increase for it. Not saying it will, but everyone's got that on the radar right now in the investing field who's kind of just keeping an eye on what this stuff is doing. On the bad side, no government organization will organize or fix these issues. So if there's a huge technical issue, your money might be gone, and like gone, gone. There's no helpline or anything to solve the problems if you get scammed or lose your access. A lot of these cryptocurrencies use something called a private key, which is kind of like a password. And if you forget your password or lose it, you can't recover your funds. There's no undo button. There's no, oh, I have to call the customer support line so they can get me back into my account. It's a very, very cutthroat and dangerous situation if you're not careful. This is also a relatively new technology, so we still have to see what society and the world has to react based on this. And also, excuse me, there is a security hole, or there could be a security hole that can completely ruin the currency, which is why these currencies are often seen as open source, which basically all of the code that makes things work is given to the public, so you can inspect and look for flaws or issues. So in this chapter, this is for my students taking my course with me, we're going to be learning 4 different subsections. So 2.2.A is Introduction to Money. This is where we are. We're just learning the basics, the history of it, how it's used, open discussion, things like that. 2.2.B is the origins of money. So I'm going to be giving you I'm going to give you like 12 topics or something like that, and you're going to choose 5 of those topics that interest you. So you'll have some say in what you learn and research. 2.2.C is based on supply and demand. So we're going to learn about those 2 words and how they play a huge role in how the prices of things are established. And then finally, we'll look into 2.2.D, which is inflation. How your money basically becomes worth less and less over time in terms of spending power, but that's nothing to be panicked about, at least in the United States. Again, this is one of those situations where we want to be cautious and aware, but I don't think we need to sound the panic alarm or anything else like that based on the fact that the government could print more money at an excessive rate. So, as a reminder, it is entirely false that money will control your life, but you do need to be aware of it. You need to understand how it works, what it does, the history of it, all the different trends and information, and you really just want to be mindful of all those different things. The goal of this unit is not to make you be obsessed with money to the point of where that's all you care about. I want to make you skilled. I want to make you knowledgeable. I want to make it so that you understand how this stuff works. And really, I want you to make the best decision so that it doesn't end up ruling our lives. And that's a huge factor on this. So, just keep that in mind as we navigate through this chapter. So, we have some time for questions and discussion. These are questions to think about and reflect upon, and also things that we will talk about in class. So we'll discuss a couple of things here. How has money impacted you? What has it done to impact your life? Do you even value money? There are some people who just don't care about money. Does money buy you happiness? Could it buy you happiness? These are questions, again, to think about. I think money could make you happy maybe temporarily. This is a cool thing you want, so you go do it. You want to go on a vacation, that costs money. You want to buy someone, a surprise or throw them a birthday party or a celebration or something. Yeah, that could bring a lot of happiness. But just because you have money doesn't mean that you're going to be happy. I'd love for people to share their stories involving money. If you're just a subscriber to my YouTube channel, this is something where if you want to leave some comments and stories, I would love to hear them. I love reading stories about, stories involving it, whether it be something where you learned a very serious lesson, or maybe you had a really bad experience with money. Who knows? Talk about whatever you want in there. And also, I'd love to hear people's opinions on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. But what I am going to pre-warn you with, if you decide to leave a comment, I will respond with well-researched and knowledgeable answers, because I am very, very enthusiastic in that field. I believe myself to be very well-researched, and I believe that I have a solid understanding of how that stuff works. With the countless number of books that I've read, the involvement in communities, working with it, helping other people learn about it, assisting businesses gain a better understanding of it. I've done a lot of stuff with cryptocurrency. So if you're just going to say, haha, it's a scam, you're going to get some sort of technical response back. So I greatly encourage you to, obviously make you know, statements and things that you know or understand, or maybe even just ask me questions, and I'd be more than happy to answer those. So with that in mind, hopefully this has been an insightful presentation to start off our unit, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what we unravel over the next several weeks.